Thank you very much for joining today's session. In our last discussion, we had been talking about the flame test, which is belonging to the qualitative analysis. That means by applying or by utilizing that technique, we were identifying the chemical species present in a sample. And by using flame test, we identified the metallic ion, that means cation, present in an ionic compound. We analyzed several ionic compounds, binary ionic and ternary ionic compounds. Today we are going to talk about the technique through which we can identify the anions, that means non-metallic ion. That could be the polyatomic ion or monoatomic ion. So this is also belonging to qualitative analysis, but in this case, we are going to identifying anions, as we had found that the flame test has a limitation, and that is we cannot identify the anion or the negative ions present in an ionic compound. So this technique is required to identify the total anion and cation present in an ionic compound. This technique is not much critical. It is very simple. Here we would like to make the solution of the compound which containing the targeted ion like sulfate ion or sulfite ion, phosphate or phosphide, carbonate or hydrogen or bicarbonate, chloride, bromide. All right. So this ion containing compound we will dissolve in water. So here most of the solutions would be aqueous solution. Aqueous solution means where the water is used as a solvent. So we will prepare aqueous solution of the sample as well as the aqueous solution of the identification reagent. Identification reagent means the reagent that we are going to mix together the sample to identify or to find out the presence of anions in the sample. So both the sample and the identification reagent will be dissolved in water. That is, here we are dealing with the aqueous solution of the sample as well as the aqueous solution of identification reagent. Then we will mix together and we will find the change. We'll find the change in the system, and thereby we are going to find out the presence of anion, different kind of anion. So here in this case, there are several kind of common cation we have already discussed in the flame test, and common anions are carbonate, sulfate, sulfide, nitrate, nitrite, fluorine, chlorine, iodine, thiocyanate. All these are the common anions found in the compound. So which kind of apparatus we require for carrying out this experiment? Most of the cases test tubes, then the styrene rod for mixing purpose, dropper, reagent bottle, wash bottles. You already know the functions of all these apparatus as we described earlier. Spatula, test tube holder, test tube rack, Bunsen burner, boiling chips, test tube brush for cleaning purpose, centrifuge and centrifuge tube, cobalt blue glass. Cobalt blue glass usually used for identifying the flame color. So in this section or in this experiment, we do not require this cobalt blue glass. Then spot plate, charcoal block. Charcoal block is not required in today's experiment because it required in another experiment where we will identify the pure iron in iron compound by reduction method. Blowpipe to change the flame direction whenever necessary. Filter paper for separation purpose. Litmus paper for identifying the acidity or basicity. Heating rack, platinum ware, we used it in the flame test. And yeah, these are the route balance sometimes required for making the solution. But in this case, this one is not much important. All right, so I would like to share the demonstration with you so that you can get the idea how the identification process is done, or how we can accomplish, how we can perform the identification of anions present in the ionic compound.
Carbonate anion is detected in sodium carbonate salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium carbonate salt drops of diluted hydrochloric acid. What do you observe? Effervescence is observed due to the evolution of carbon dioxide gas. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium carbonate salt to a clean test tube, then adding distilled water with shaking to form a solution. Then add magnesium sulfate solution to the prepared sodium carbonate solution. What do you observe? A white precipitate of magnesium carbonate is formed on cold without heating. Summary. On adding diluted hydrochloric acid to the sodium carbonate salt, effervescence takes place due to evolution of carbon dioxide gas. On adding magnesium sulfate to sodium carbonate, a white precipitate of magnesium carbonate is formed on cold. Experiment of detection of bicarbonate anion. Bicarbonate anion is detected in sodium bicarbonate salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium bicarbonate salt drops of diluted hydrochloric acid. What do you observe? Effervescence is observed due to evolution of carbon dioxide gas. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium bicarbonate salt to a clean test tube, then adding distilled water with shaking to form a solution. Add magnesium sulfate solution to the prepared sodium bicarbonate solution. Why isn't a white precipitate formed on cold, as in case of sodium carbonate solution? Because the produced magnesium bicarbonate salt solution is soluble in water. Do you think a white precipitate is formed after heating? Yes. The white precipitate is formed after heating due to the change of magnesium bicarbonate into magnesium carbonate, which is insoluble in water. Summary. On adding diluted hydrochloric acid to the sodium bicarbonate salt, effervescence takes place due to evolution of carbon dioxide gas. On adding magnesium sulfate solution to sodium bicarbonate solution, a white precipitate is formed after heating. Experiment of the detection of phosphate and sulfate anions. The main experiment to detect phosphate anion. Phosphate anion will be detected by using sodium phosphate salt. Transfer a small amount of sodium phosphate salt in a clean test tube. Then add distilled water with shaking to form a solution. Add barium chloride solution to sodium phosphate solution. What do you observe? A white precipitate of barium phosphate is formed. The main experiment to detect sulfate anion. Sulfate anion will be detected by using sodium sulfate salt. Transfer a small amount of sodium sulfate salt in a clean test tube. Then add distilled water with shaking to form a solution. Add barium chloride solution. What do you observe? A white precipitate of barium sulfate is formed. The differentiation between the two precipitates, barium phosphate and barium sulfate. To differentiate between the white precipitate of barium phosphate and the white precipitate of barium sulfate, add to each of them diluted hydrochloric acid. What do you observe? The precipitate of barium phosphate is soluble in diluted hydrochloric acid, while the precipitate of barium sulfate is insoluble in it. Experiment of detection of sulfide anion. Sulfide anion is detected in sodium sulfide salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium sulfide salt drops of the group reagent, the diluted hydrochloric acid, What do you observe? Effervescence is observed due to the evolution of hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotten eggy smell. Which turns a paper wet with lead acetate into black. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium sulfide salt to a clean test tube. Then adding distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution. Then add to it silver nitrate solution. What do you observe? A black precipitate of silver sulfide is formed. Summary. On adding diluted hydrochloric acid to sodium sulfide salt, hydrogen sulfide gas evolves, which turns a paper wetted with lead acetate into black. And on adding silver nitrate solution to sodium sulfide solution, a black precipitate is formed. Experiment of detection of sulfite anion. Sulfite anion is detected in sodium sulfite salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Before starting the main experiment, we must prepare a paper wetted by acidified potassium dichromate using a concentrated sulfuric acid. Add drops of the group reagent diluted hydrochloric acid to sodium sulfite salt. What do you observe? Effervescence takes place due to the evolution of sulfur dioxide gas. To test the evolution of sulfur dioxide gas, which has a pungent smell, by approaching a paper wetted by acidified potassium dichromate. What do you observe? The orange color changes into green color because potassium dichromate is reduced by gas into green chromium 3 sulfate. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium sulfite salt to a clean test tube, then add distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution, then add to it silver nitrate solution. What do you observe? A white precipitate of silver sulfite is formed, which changes into black by heating. Summary. On adding diluted hydrochloric acid to sodium sulfite salt, a sulfur dioxide gas evolves. That changes a paper wetted with acidified potassium dichromate from orange to green. On adding silver nitrate solution to sodium sulfite solution, a white precipitate is formed which changes into black by heating. Experiment of detection of nitrate anion. Nitrate anion is detected in sodium nitrate salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium nitrate salt drops of concentrated sulfuric acid and heat. What do you observe? Brown vapors of nitrogen dioxide gas evolves due to decomposition of nitric acid. The density of the vapors increase by adding copper filings and a green substance of copper-2 nitrate is formed. Summary. On adding the concentrated sulfuric acid to sodium nitrate salt, on heating a brown vapors of nitrogen dioxide gas evolve, which increase by adding copper filings. Experiment of detection of nitrite anion. Nitrite anion is detected in sodium nitrite salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium nitrite salt drops of diluted hydrochloric acid. What do you observe? A colorless nitric oxide gas evolves, which changes into reddish-brown nitrogen dioxide gas at the mouth of the tube. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium nitrite salt to a clean test tube and adding distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution. Then add to it acidified potassium permanganate with concentrated sulfuric acid. What do you observe? The violet color of potassium permanganate disappears. Summary. On adding drops of diluted hydrochloric acid to sodium nitrite salt, a colorless nitric oxide gas evolves and changes into reddish brown gas at the mouth of the tube. On adding acidified potassium permanganate to sodium nitrite solution, the violet color disappears. Experiment of detection of chloride anion. Chloride anion is detected in sodium chloride salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium chloride salt drops of concentrated sulfuric acid. What do you observe? Effervescence is observed because hydrogen chloride gas evolves, which is colorless. On approaching a glass rod wetted with ammonium hydroxide or ammonia solution to the mouth opening of the test tube, so it gives white fumes of ammonium chloride. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium chloride salt to a clean test tube, then adding distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution. Then add to it silver nitrate solution. What do you observe? A white precipitate of silver chloride is formed. Add a concentrated ammonia solution to the precipitate. What do you observe? The precipitate will dissolve in the concentrated ammonia solution. Summary. On adding the concentrated sulfuric acid to sodium chloride salt, a colorless hydrogen chloride gas evolves, which gives white fumes with a glass rod wetted with ammonia solution. On adding silver nitrate solution to sodium chloride solution, a white precipitate of silver chloride is formed, which dissolves in a concentrated ammonia solution. Experiment of detection of bromide anion. Bromide anion is detected in sodium bromide salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to sodium bromide salt drops of the group reagent, which is the concentrated sulfuric acid. What do you observe? Effervescence takes place due to the evolution of hydrogen bromide gas, which is colorless and partially oxidized by the sulfuric acid. And orange-red fumes of bromine will be separated and increases by heating and turns a paper wetted with starch into yellow. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium bromide salt to a clean test tube, then add distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution. Then add to it silver nitrate solution. What do you observe? A white yellowish precipitate is formed of silver bromide. Add a concentrated ammonia solution to the precipitate. What do you observe? The precipitate slowly dissolves in the concentrated ammonia solution. Summary. On adding the concentrated sulfuric acid to sodium bromide salt, a reddish-orange fumes of bromine are separated and change a paper wetted with starch into yellow. On adding silver nitrate solution to sodium bromide solution, a white yellowish precipitate of silver bromide is formed, which slowly dissolves in a concentrated ammonia solution. Experiment of detection of iodide anion. Iodide anion is detected in potassium iodide salt by a main experiment and another confirmatory experiment. Main experiment. Add to potassium iodide salt drops of the group reagent, which is concentrated sulfuric acid. What do you observe? With heating, hydrogen iodide gas evolves, which is colorless and partially oxidized quickly by sulfuric acid, and violet fumes of iodine is formed and increases by heating. The violet fumes of iodine turns a paper wetted with starch into blue. Confirmatory experiment. Add a small amount of sodium iodide to a clean test tube, then add distilled water with shaking to form a salt solution. Then add to it silver nitrate solution. What do you observe? A yellow precipitate of silver iodide is formed. Add a concentrated ammonia solution to the precipitate. What do you observe? The yellow precipitate is insoluble in ammonia solution. Summary: on adding the concentrated sulfuric acid to potassium iodide salt, the violet vapors of iodine are separated and turns a paper wetted with starch into blue. On adding silver nitrate solution to potassium iodide solution, a yellow precipitate of silver iodide is formed, which is insoluble in ammonia